Yummy. Waiting for some clients to come pick up some squishies. Hope everybody's doing well. There's so much information that comes at us on a daily basis. How do you guys do it? How do you work through? And I know I'm waiting for you guys to come on, but how do you work through information? I don't know how many bits of information um, is thrown at us daily, and how do you work through it? It's like having, emails that just keep flooding your box, or books. It's not even really emails. Some of them are emails or memes that really should be books, and we only have pieces and bits of this. And if you wanna, I haven't set a pattern of time to go live at this point. It's just when I can. So shout out to everybody who could catch me on the replay, and we'll work out some time where I have some random thoughts, and then sometimes when I'm actually sharing some extensive. So I haven't forgotten about the R. Kelly study, y'all. I haven't forgotten it. That thing is deep. Woo! Anywho, how do you manage all the information? But today, I tend to like to process it. I guess that's why. Like, there'll be a story. Like, there's that one story with the guy in Chicago, and I will intentionally not look at it. Because I will intentionally not look at any of it, because I find myself personally that it becomes too much, and then we'll just store a whole lot of information, and sometimes we can't make it make sense because we're only given bits and pieces. That's kind of how the media works. It's a story. They chew it up and give it to you how they think they want you to have it, and then that's pretty much what it is. But today, I watched earlier this morning. I watched a documentary. Not a documentary. It's more like a short, brief history lesson on the 10 top tribes. I believe I shared it here on YouTube. The 10 top tribes that came across in the transatlantic slave trade, and I kind of shared it on that little community page. Why I think this is important is because at the core of this conversation, and shout out to those who just joined us, is understanding that I think sometimes we either neglect but through ignoring it, or we don't really understand. I've said this before, even when I was sharing the Left Project, and it's this is one of the truths about so-called black people. There is no such thing. That's why I like to put it in quotes. They're like, why does she keep quoting? Melanated, yes. Black people is a creation. The same way white people is a social construct that was created to classify certain people groups from those who are controlling the narrative. Black people and white people don't exist. Black people didn't come over here in the transatlantic slave trade. Different ethnicities did. So that video I shared, I was like, hallelujah. Thank you, sir, for just, putting it together in such a way that it helps people to understand this very, very important point. When we were reading, what's his name? What's his name again? His name escapes me. When we were reading his autobiography, it's going to come back to me. There's one point where he speaks about him sailing all over, and this is during the time of slavery, and he goes to Jamaica. In Jamaica, he said that on Sunday he found the different tribes represented that were each doing their own different thing on Sunday, which would be their only days off. Wow, Amuna. Maybe I got a lot on my mind, right? So, again, his name is on the tip of my tongue, and I can't bring it back. My point is, historically, and when you study slavery, you will find that at that time there were no black people and there were no white people. You had Englishmen, you had Scottishmen, you had Portuguese, you had the Spanish, you had the French, you had the Dutch. These are all the major players in the slave game. They were not, if you call the Englishmen, and you see this represented, even though some people don't like to look at roots, you see this represented in roots, where you have this man who's not of this certain type of blood, and he has to prove himself to the English nobility. and they look down on you because you're Scottish. You had a lot of the Scottish and Irish being the slave taskmasters because they were, quote, dirty ends. You know what I'm saying? They were white ends. They were lower class to the ruling class. So this thought of white people and black people, the truth is that is a construct that was not too long created so that it can put everything and people into their proper boxes. So the truth about black people is that there are no black people. I mean, like, what are you talking about? Not even physically there are no, I mean, we are melanated with different hues of brown, okay? If you even wanted to be, there are no white people. But anyway, that's the first, the truth portion, and that's something you can look up. So again, I shared that video because it's very educational. You look at the Fulani, you look at the Akan, you look at the Igbos, you look at all of these different people groups that were represented, and my voice is going, y'all. They were warring, and I read the book. I have the book, History of West African. It's at home, okay? And I shared that book. I might have to go digging into some of the stuff I already shared and share it again, so that we can understand. Number one, the coming together of melanated people from different ethnicities and different tribes was forcible. It wasn't something that was, you know what, I think it's a good idea for us to work together. We're looking at why can't we get along? We have to look at the core, the seed, the genesis, the very beginning. When our foreparents were stuffed and forced on the boat, you weren't getting along. Here's another truth. I know we don't want to hear it, but you wasn't getting along. There were melanated faces that captured one another and sold one another and betrayed one another. Now this is truth. And I've said it before, and people got mad, but if we want to do healing and we want to work towards a better tomorrow, we have to be honest. That was not the truth. So we're looking at trauma bonding, which is another. I'm giving you, and I'm going to keep repeating the stuff that gave me like peace in my mind to understand that it was forcible. No, Israelite man, correct. It's not given to us. This is why we are obligated to go and take it. We are obligated to go and find out and dig in the records. There's one book series that I want, right? There's so much stuff I would like to do. There's one that's like on my list because it's like it was written like 1800s. It's like a 6-book compilation that got like some stuff in there. One of them books is like $600. Okay, this is where they were keeping extensive records, and they priced that joint outside of your range. Okay. So we have to understand that they understood if you needed somebody who was proficient in X, Y, and Z, that is the region they would go to. This is why in the Roots movie, in that narrative, there was some truth in there where they would say, this is a Guinea man. This is even as was brought up in the video, and I did the research. So when I saw it in the video, I was like, that's a confirmation that they, in Ghana, there was a castle or a space, a port named Kumaranti. And out of this port would be a certain type of person and a certain type of temperament of the people that came from that port. And they would call them Kumaranti Negroes, okay? What happened was they were known for insurrections. They were known for not taking slavery lying down. And what happened is they got a reputation throughout the islands. And I'm gonna come and look at I'm gonna come and look at the chat in a minute. They were known throughout the islands as the rebel rousers. So what happened is slave masters were like, you don't want those Negroes because they're dissidents, they're rebel rousers. You don't want them messing up the rest of your slave population. And why I found this particularly interesting for me is because I would always, growing up, ask myself the question, why do Jamaicans act like that? My parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents were dropped off in the island of Jamaica. And I would always, even as growing up in that environment, I would always say to myself, why Jamaicans act like this? You know what I'm saying? Why Jamaican, like the temperament, even when you look at other islands, you'll be like, man, their temperament is off the chain. The only other temperament that I see match that temperament in another way is Haiti, right? because you have Barbadians have a different temperament. Those in America have a different temperament. The reason is because of the Coromantee Negroes. What happened was because they got this reputation, and the slavers didn't want them to infect the rest of the population. They were just like, it was a dumping station of all rebels, and they dumped them in Jamaica. That's history. You can look it up. And that's why they call them Coromantee Negroes, because they were kings and they were queens. This is this whole thought of kings and queens. They were nobility who refused, in some spaces, who refused to be conquered. So they will fight. and when I found that piece of information, I was like, you know what? Might be some truth to this, because I've just never seen a set of people that it's just wild to me. Like I said, the closest temperament is Haitian, with the quick to, like, Haiti's the first to fight for their independence in the West. If I'm not mistaken, 1805, Haiti's like, yo, I'm done. This is it. We're not doing this anymore. And the French, and for those who don't know why Haiti is the, or if we forget, because this is history that we're supposed to remember, why Haiti is the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, is because they made Haiti pay France reparations. They made Haiti pay France reparations. That was crazy. Like, you want your freedom, now you're gonna have to pay us. After they stole you, they gonna want you to pay them. So it's a lot of history here. It's so much that I want to go more into the Caribbean history, because each and every island has their own narrative once you got here. So let me back up about the truth about black people. There are no black people, number one. There are all of these ethnicities that have been forced to come together, and that bond that we share with one another, why it doesn't always last is because it's a trauma bond. And I spoke about trauma bond. A trauma bond is somebody who goes through a traumatic experience with you, and you find that you're connected through negativity or something traumatic. And so oftentimes when there isn't any more an immediate danger or threat, then you see that the people break apart. You would have met your enemy on the boat. You would have met paying attention, for the most part, from what I had the feedback, because I don't know everybody, but I'm saying the feedback that I have when I interacted physically, virtually, during all of the slave movies that came on over the last 2-3 years. Like, there was big groups that's watching The Underground, and big groups that was watching. And if you look back through my channel, I was commenting and people were commenting, and I was just kind of seeing where they are with this. And because we're still traumatized by the actual thing, we're not really looking at what it's saying, that you were forced when, even Book of Negroes, okay? When you are trying to find who speaks your language when you're on the slave ship and how you're going to communicate. This is like, I have to come together with you, not I want to come together with you. Right? And that's the trauma bond that melanated people from different tribes and different places and different regions have gone through since the beginning. And so you see us breaking up into these little cliques and tribes and things here on the other side, because we never just came to where, you know what, I want to vibe with you because I like you. It's more, we are all being oppressed, and I need you to help me get out of this situation. And then after I get out of it, I'm not sure if I'm going to like you or not. This is what we've experienced. So when many came over here who lost their mothers, who lost their wives, who lost their sisters, who lost their brothers and fathers, you had this fictive kinship, and I've spoken about that before. And we still do it on to this day, where we say that person is your play cousin, or you meet your brother, your sister's friends, parents, or whatever, and they become mother and they become father, and people on the outside look at you and be like, do you know them? And you be like, no. And we easily identify the figure of an aunt or a mother or a sister or a brother, and then we call them that by that, even though we're not blood related to that person. You saw it a lot in the 70s. Soul brother, you know what I'm saying? What's up, sister? And the people in and around us is like, y'all know each other? And we're like, no, but that's my brother, that's my sister. That's the fictive kinship that we were forced to a certain degree to adapt. When the young man had a mother who was sold off, or a grandmother, then you will have the local resident mother or grandmother, and that is also due to the trauma and the experience. I saw a message that went up. So essentially, have you ever seen the color of the cross? I believe some time ago. I don't remember. I don't remember all of that. I watch a lot of documentaries, so I don't remember the fullness of that. But I do know that, you know, when we're looking at, hey, peace, Jason, what's going on? When we're looking at why we can't get along, and because we were not originally one people. I mean, in recent history, right? Again, you were represented by all of these different, each tribe in Africa. Some of them have their own deities. You could live next door to the person, or, you know, in another tribe over. They'll have their own deities, their own traditions, their own customs. You understand what I'm saying? And they're all melanated. And people who on the outside will be like, they all look alike to me. But internally, they'll be like, no, I'm not that person, and that person is not me. Like I said before, I watch a lot of Nigerian movies. I haven't been able to watch them recently, but I watch them for many reasons, and culture research is one of them, right? And if a man goes to get a girl from a village, or he meets her in a city, which is not as it's not as common. The younger children don't care as much about this culture as the older ones do. And he brings her home, or he goes home, better yet, and asks his parents to go and represent him to speak on his behalf to get this woman. They're going to begin to ask questions like, who are your people? Where are you from? What village is that? What region is that? And they're going to begin to see whether or not their community has good or bad relations with her community, because they understand that these communities, when they marry, they're joining forces. And so if that community is known to be their enemy, they will be against the marriage. And that's in 2019. You still see them, who is in control of their narrative, Nollywood, they're in control of their own narrative, still putting that in their entertainment to say, hey, look, even though we may look alike, we're not the same people. And I'll be looking at the screen like, well, somebody needs to send a memo over here to the West, because we still don't understand that. I'm not saying that we can't work together. I'm saying for us to understand why there sometimes is a block in that working together, because there's an awareness that although you may look like me, there are these lines that people and time have drawn in the sand. So that one of the truths about black people is that we're not black. And white people are not white. That's a racial construct that was used to kind of divvy up the pot. When like I said, when they first came here, you weren't white. You were English, you were Portuguese, you were Dutch, you were French, you were whatever the designation of your motherland, wherever y'all came from, that's what you were. Book written called The Invention of White People, among other things. It's in the history. And the Baker's Rebellion looked at this rebellion of the lower class, where it didn't matter your color. It was the lower class that was rebelling against the aristocracy. And they sat and decided, well, how are we going to make it to feel like it's like on the job, even though the supervisor really don't have that much whatever, how are we going to make them feel like they're one step above the other one so that they can work for us? You understand what I'm saying? And that's kind of what happened with this racial coding system that we so easily walk into. And we are, you know what I'm saying, our people are the only ones, and I know we've seen this before or heard it before, that have changed. It's so fluid. You know what I'm saying? It's so fluid. They're like, you know, one title, white. And then you have all of these fluid titles through the years. You were Negro, you were white, you were Afro-American, you were all of these things you were colored. I mean, dang. You know what I'm saying? Like, how is that? But if you came from a certain tribe, you were just that. You know what I'm saying? If you were Igbo, you were Igbo. If you're Yoruba, you're Yoruba. If you're Fulani, you're Fulani. Like, you know what I'm saying? But again, because those things were erased over time, you better believe when you first got the individual, that ship manifesto or those papers would indicate what region you came from. And I've seen some of them in my research where they would have what port they got you from, how many. It was like an inventory. That's exactly what it was. It was ship inventory. So that you can understand, listen, I have a Mandinko who's worth more because he's such and such. They actually got worth, and when it came later, when the slave trade was actually shut down, because it didn't really shut down, there was still some pirating going on even after it was supposedly abolished. But then that's when the market value went up, because And that's where the inbreeding happened, because now when you're no longer able to get them from the continent, you had to start this inbreeding process. Before, here's another truth. Earlier on, it was easier to replace the slave than to keep them alive. So earlier on in the Americas, not only just America, but South America, the Caribbean, there was a time frame, like a warranty, or how long you can work this individual to the bone until they die. And it didn't matter because slaves were so cheap, you can just buy another one. And that's kind of how they worked them. Like I mean, I get some more, it ain't no problem. Work you to the bone, you die, drop dead, boom, just get another one. But as time progressed and it began to dwindle out because of the pushback on the slave trade, now the value in slaving went up. And now a certain types of slaves, enslaved individual, not slave, enslaved individual, were worth more because of the perception. It's like, our foreparents were branded like cars was. So if you see a Benz, the perception is they had us classified like Benzes or Jeeps or Dodge cars. Okay, you're from this region, then that means this. You're from that region, oh, you're a good breeder. You're from this region, you're a good houseboy because you're an intellectual. This is the reality and the truth about how our foreparents were classified. And I know it's hard to hear, but it's a truth and a reality to understand what then became something that we internalize. Because if we think that our foreparents didn't use what the slave master said of them to classify each other, that's not true. I've read in narratives where they would begin to hate on each other because you came from a certain region or because you worked for a poor master. It's like they would be like, oh, you work for Master Jack. Master Jack is whack. He don't even take care of employees. That's like telling somebody you work for McDonald's versus you work for a 5-star restaurant. And the enslaved individuals began to use this, who their master was, as a status symbol. That's another truth that's still happening today. Let me say that again. The enslaved individuals used to, not all, but the ones that I have read and come upon, used to use who you worked for. Tell me if this is not happening today. Oh, the person works for NBC. The person is second in line to the president. The person is this, that, and third. They used who you worked for, right? Even though everybody was working on the plan. Let that sink in. I was like Gucci controversy. We have the thought that when you step out there, what you got on? I got red bottoms on. I got Gucci on. I got Prada on. And Gucci and Prada and what today, Burberry, whoever they are, with the news today, right, are showing you, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Now you're paying me to oppress you. You're paying me for you to feel like you have status because you are in close association with me, right? Because what do you say? Let me get into name brands a little bit. It's the same thing like the master. Which master you working for? When you come amongst your people and you say, I have on this, I have on that, that means I am attached to this symbol of status, which makes me, by proxy, important. We got to understand the psychology of what we're saying. In the same way you worked in Master Jack's house and Master Jack's was rich, then by proxy, I am rich. Like Malcolm X say, we rich boss or we sick boss. In the same way, if you work for a poor slave master, then you get to get clowned on. And if any, I can go get the records, even though none of you really have it. So that's another truth, and that's another, like I wanted to call it, the residuals of this experience, is that you'll have people who saying, I'm not going to stop boycotting Gucci. You'll have people who saying they're still going to wear Prada. You have people who saying these status symbols still give me some importance. That's the reason why the minute you get a little money, you go get it. Because then you want somebody else to see you. See, it wouldn't mean, for many, if nobody sees you, then what's the point? You know what I'm saying? So our people tend to buy the stuff where it's printed on the shirt. Like you can't just have the little pullover that may be Gucci, but no one knows, because that's whack. You know what I'm saying? So we need to have it printed 100 times all over the clothes and all over the hat and all over the shoes so that people can see that's what you have on. And then by extension, say that you are worth something. And because we, the people, lack an intrinsic worth because of our trauma and experience, we look to get it by external things, cars, possessions, homes, things of this nature. So that's another truth about our experience and so-called black people. This is why they say we have a trillion dollar buying power, and that everything that comes in goes out. Because we're in want of all things. That's why everything that goes in, comes in, goes out. Because we're in want of all things. For the most part here, we don't own anything substantial. We don't produce anything substantial. You know what I'm saying? We don't have claim to anything substantial as a collective. And so for every single thing that you want and desire, you have to go to someone else to get it. So when they say, when people look at our, here's another truth. Here's another truth. Sorry. When people look at our spending, they're not necessarily looking at the fact that everything that you purchase is because you yourself or no one that you know produces it. From your clothing to your shoes to your foods, you know, you're going to somebody for everything because of what the economic disadvantage as a people that you have experienced in the West. You didn't inherit anything. You didn't inherit the 40 acres and the mule. You didn't inherit, you know what I'm saying? If you did, they took it away in any mass quantity or enough to actually build up the wealth of the community, is what I'm saying. The community, and I use that loosely. So anyway, that's my thoughts. I have more, but you know, no matter what we try, look at Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was able to galvanize millions of people under this premise, hey, that we can come together and do this. And the infighting, it happened from without, but the infighting begins to eat away at the very core of what's happening. Let's come together. There goes the trauma bond. Come together to fight against X, Y, and Z. And when that's not enough, it falls apart. Civil rights, again, the trauma bond. Let's come together and fight this one enemy, this one injustice. And when that injustice or enemy is no longer an immediate threat, you fall apart. It's a pattern. And the reason why it's a pattern is because we're still in the environment that the injury occurred. And so because you have not gotten to that safe space, you know, in that horror movie, I don't like horror movies, but when they're running, but when they get to that safe space, then they could process. Okay, we haven't really gotten to the safe space yet. We're still in the space, the house where, that's proverbial house where the abuse was and still is committed. And this is why I call it a domestic abuse, because now you're getting the verbal, now you're getting the emotional, and in many spaces you're still getting the physical abuse. So I can't see. Let me know if you guys are here. Let me know your thoughts. Give me some feedback. Let me know your thoughts. Have you heard about Coromantee Negroes? Have you done any study of any specific people groups and where they were highly populated, and were you aware of all the different kinds? Like I said, I shared it so you can look at it. I think it's like 10-15 minutes. It's not really that long, but it goes into the different ones who they went to, but the Gold Coast, the slave region, you know what I'm saying? And different, here's one more thing about that. At different times in the slave trade history, different countries had access to different ports. You heard of the Bantu tribe of Africa. Correct. So these are the things, when we want to just put names and faces onto stuff, that means we have to dig a little bit more, because in 2019 is no longer sufficient for the way in which we're approaching the subject matter. Depending on what I've learned is that when we talk about the slave trade, you have to pinpoint a time in history, because it evolved. For almost the first 200 years, it was straight Portuguese rule. Why is this significant? Because when you look at when it began in the mid-late 1400s, and you look at who had control, they had a monopoly. The Portuguese had a monopoly for a long period of time. And the English was standing on the side like, I'm not too sure, I'm not going to get into it. The Spanish, what happened, and I got to come back and talk about it, because when I found out that, I was like, this is wild. They put in bids. Let me tell you how wild this is. They put in bids. It was called the Acentos de Negros. if I'm not mistaken, where it was a bid to say, listen, like how you put in a government bid, it was a bid to say, listen, I'm gonna deliver you. Say they like the West Indian trading company. They made all these little benign sounding names, right? And they would bid and put in bids to say, I will deliver 10. Then they would contract with that country or whatever to deliver these slaves. It was, y'all not understanding, man. This stuff is crazy. And so for a long time, the Portuguese had a foothold before the other people came on, like the Dutch, like the English. The English was the last to come on. And I often wonder, when they say the Americas, the slavery in the Americas was the worst, a lot of people argue about, now we're going to argue about which slavery was the worst. But the English came on the last, if I'm not mistaken, and they came on like they had a point to prove. So you had different ways in which the different masters or the ruling class saw themselves and saw the people. But the English came in like, I don't want to mix with them. And they had all these anti-misogyny laws and anti-mixing laws. But the French, as you can see, they wasn't too much hung up on that. And so you have a lot of the mulattoes that come out of New Orleans that initially were in Haiti and things like that, because they were mixing with the population. You know what I'm saying? And so if you pick a point in history and say, I want to study Dutch, you know what I'm saying? I want to study the French and their participation in the slave trade and what islands because everybody didn't distribute slaves to everywhere. You only could distribute to where you was contracted. It was this thing was like Amazon. You know what I'm saying? It was very meticulous. You couldn't just break port. I know I said I was talking about the truth about black people, but man, shoot, this is my topic right here. You couldn't just break port anywhere. They had to establish relationships with the kings and the leaders in that, because they owned the coastline. So when the European ships, when you see some of those pictures or some of those movies where they're hanging out in the water, they would be hanging out in the water, right? And on shore, they would have to send a little boaty thing with some people in it to go ask the ruler it's like, can I post up on your block real quick? The European, right? And they're like, yeah, you can post up on my block, but you owe me some taxes. And they was like, all right, I'll hit you up with some taxes. And sometimes I read one account where they invited the African rulers to the ship, like, yo, come through. You know what I'm saying? I got a party. Here goes some rum. Here goes some liquor. Here goes a little kickback. Corrupted governments. It's the same thing. Nothing has changed. So they give them a little kickback. Next thing you know, they break in port. When they break port, the middlemen, which are the slave catchers, right? They are transporting people. When it got really bad, they would take like 2-3 months to take people from the very internal ports of Africa to the coast. This is where, when they say the millions died in the slave trade, and a lot of people's like, where the millions at? You're not counting the amount of people died in transit. There's one river that routes throughout. There was one river, I think it's called the Slave River in Ghana, where the slaves, it was red, they said, because of the blood that was spilled on the slaves. So let me fast forward. Here's some truth. Y'all want some truth about black people? Here's some truth, okay? When some are making their way and they're dying from thirst, they're dying from hunger, you see this illustrated again, walking. When you actually get to the factory, this is where this word, I was like, okay, this is where the word coming from. When you get to where the factory, the factors were the slaves, the products. So they would either store you in these dungeons. This is where you see people go to Ghana and they're in the slave dungeon. They would either store you in this dungeon, or if the time was close for you to go on the boat, they would store you in these little makeshift prisons, which were called barracoons, which according to my research, this is where, this is one of the probable areas where the word coon comes from. This coon is the object in the barracoon, which is a Portuguese word, if I'm not mistaken, okay? The barracoon, or the barracks, this makeshift prison type thing. It's a lot, y'all. I say that to say, by the time you get there, you would have met It's like going to a job fair, but it's a slave fair because they actually had those slave fairs at markets inland where people would go and buy slaves. Because remember, they had a quota to fill. So by the time you get to the European who's waiting on the shore, so you didn't just have to pass inspection when you got to the free world, you had to pass inspection on the continent to see whether or not he was going to buy you, because he's paying the slave trader for you. And so they're looking to see if you're sick. They're looking to see if you're, because the elderly, they weren't taking the elderly and they weren't taking the very young. Not in the beginning. They were taking mostly males in the beginning, and later on it was more males than females. And later on, when they decided to breed, because like I said, at first the slave was dispensable. They just wanted to throw them away. But when they realized that they can begin to breed, that's when they started to bring in more females. Right? And so when they see whether or not you're viable, then they can turn a profit for. Some of them were killed on the spot. So when people are saying, where's the ships and how many people, are you not going to count the people who died before they actually got on the ship? Africa was drained 2 ways. As just like they say in the clip, because I started to look at that slave trade as well. Africa was raped 2 ways. One way was the transatlantic slave trade, and the other way was the Saharan slave trade. There's few people who actually talk about or bring to light the Saharan slave trade. The Saharan slave trade went towards the east, and the transatlantic went towards the west. In the Saharan, it was more of taking of males and castrating them so that they're and using them as labor. So that's a whole nother thing. So when the entire land was depleted of its population during this time, there's a lot of truth out here, y'all. We got to keep digging. We got to keep searching. Hopefully that helps somebody somewhere. When we're looking at the conditions that we are experiencing today and wondering why and how come and what in the world and why can't we get over it. You're talking about intergenerational slavery, or, segregation, or civil rights, or Jim Crow. This is each and everything building on top of the next. And those people who experienced it had children, and they passed the epigenetics down to them, and those people, 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 and all of this trauma just built, until we're here. And we're like, well, how did we get here? What's going on now? What happened? So I would just want to say, keep that in mind as we're digging, as we're looking, as we're seeking to understand. I'm going to read the comments, and then I'm going to say, let me see what time it is, because I'm waiting on some people to come through here. It's 2 o'clock. Hold on. We the people of the Holy Bible. And this is the thing, too. This is the thing. I love my brothers and sisters. But here's the thing. The more we learn about what has happened and the fact that slavery is not, and for those who understand that Israelites were in the demographic of people who got dispersed, I know it's not readily taught that Israel was amongst the people who got dispersed, because there were a lot of people from different ethnicities who got dispersed and went into enslavement. You see what I'm saying? So Israel is amongst those people, but the entire people in my research and study is not Israel, if we can understand. And I know that it's taught like that oftentimes, but when you look historically, you see Israel being amongst the people, but Israel not being the totality of the people that was dispersed throughout. Like I said, both east and west, the slave trade did not go one way. It went into the Sahara and across into the Middle East, and then it went into the so-called New World. So with that said, leave your comments below. And I'm saying, let's continue to have this conversation. Let's continue to educate ourselves. There's so much I want to do, man. I want to visit. I'll actually have something on here. We're going to virtually visit the Jim Crow Museum. I found a little virtual tour about it. For those who may be, and I believe it's in Michigan, you might want to pop on down there and check it out. They collected all the memorabilia from that time. So when you talk about racism embedded in society, that museum collected and collected all of these memorabilia, from ashtrays to signs, of how this was an integral part of society, and how those people are still here, and the grandchildren of those people are still here. And so when you see racist flare-ups here and there, you don't know what's in people's houses. Like, I remember when I, for a short stint, was a home health aide. When you go into people's houses, you're going into, to a certain degree, their mind, their experience, their thought processes. And in some of these houses, like the slave here chair that I have here on the channel, in some of these houses are relics and memorabilia of this oppression. So it's nigh on to them. And a lot of people still are married to those thoughts and feelings that stem from somebody robbed them of the opportunity to have their slaves. I know I keep saying I'm going to finish, but slavery is one of those topics for me. Let me just end on this. Some of what we're experiencing is this thought for snatching slavery away from the South. The South didn't have a moral, the South didn't necessarily have a moral awakening and say, oh, I realized slavery was wrong. What we're understanding is that the North, to a certain degree, was not benefiting from slavery in the way in which the South was benefiting from slavery. And so the South was rich, like I said, Savannah, South Carolina, all of these places that were ports, and the South was rich. Okay, the South had land, the South was, they had produce, they were producing, and up north was the manufacturers and the, things of that nature. And so, let's say, when they go into the Civil War, it's like, you're trying to take away my livelihood from me. You're trying to take away my slaves, my property, my wealth, because that's what it was. And so the South was pissed. And their response and their answer was, this level of taking it to a next level, that if I can't externally enslave you, I'm going to emotionally and physically enslave you. And then we have this systematic racism that exists in the South. And the further south you went, right, it's the more indifferent and resentment those people in that area had towards their wealth being snatched from them. So when we look at certain things, like in Mississippi, like in Alabama, if you look at what was happening in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, look at some of them mansions, look at some of them houses, look at some of that land. And when there was no more, you gonna work me for free, they sure wasn't working it. You know what I mean? So I mean, my thought is just, there's the big bird who lives over here. Look at dude. There's a big falcon eagle-like bird who lives behind the spot. Yeah, so it's not making an excuse. I'm just giving information that adds to our narrative for us to understand, why do you hate me so? What happens when someone can no longer possess that which they really desired because it added value to their life? They're going to have a disdain for this thing. And then what happens when somebody is resentful of the fact that you took something from me that I wasn't ready yet to give up? They didn't say, oh, you got me, I give up. I had a dream last night and I'm going to set the people free. That's not what happened. They fought to the death till they was broke. Like, yo, get off us. They was ready. They seceded. They was like, you know what? We repping it so hard, dude, we out. Yes, Israelite, man. All praise be to the Most High. Right? The people were so upset that they were like, dude, we're out. You know what I'm saying? Y'all hold that. We gonna stay down here and do what it is that we do. Y'all need to mind y'all business. And the North was like, nope. We coming through and we kicking in the door. When they came through, they was burning plantations. They was wrecking shop. They was taking their goods. They was setting their animals free. They was setting their horses free. You know what I'm saying? That really happened. And you have people who can't get over it. It's like the Al Bundy story. You know what I'm saying? I would have been such and such if it wasn't for such and such. But I would still be on top of the world if it wasn't for such and such. Y'all ruined our lives. Even though it was stolen goods in the first place. But you know what I'm saying? In their minds, they're not really seeing it like that. And then we have this embedded racism that's still in the minds and the hearts of the people. So how do we approach this topic? How do we approach this conversation? Go back over there. What's up? All right, y'all. So I guess that was all around the world. But if you missed it, go to the replay. The truth about so-called black people. I guess there was a little bit of truth about so-called white people in there too, that even many people don't know about themselves. And I'm not going to give no more things. I keep saying here's the last thing, but here's the last thing. Just because you come from a place does not mean you know the whole history of the place. Sometimes we reject the notion of studying and researching because we feel we already know. I live in a place, I'm born in Brooklyn. That doesn't mean I know everything there is to know about Brooklyn. So when we come, huh? I'm coming.